Seattle Seahawks.
At PFF.
At PFF. Go tell them. Seattle Seahawks started off with Devin Witherspoon, pick number 5. This is one of the first surprises of the draft. Devin Witherspoon at 5, the cornerback out of Illinois. Jackson Smith-Njiba, wide receiver out of Ohio State. Love that first round. Derek Hall, pick 37 in the second round, an edge defender out of Auburn. Zach Charbonnet, the running back out of UCLA, was their second rounder at pick 52. On day 3, Cameron Young, big old nose tackle type out of Mississippi State, goes in round 4. Mike Morris, another edge defender out of Michigan, in round 5. And they may have gotten a starting center, Oluwatimi, the center out of Michigan, who a lot of people had going maybe a round higher or whatever, but you might have a starting center in round 5.
Did you pick up on anything interesting? You've been doing your trawl through press conferences and media appearances and the like. Did you get anything interesting from Seattle's?
I did. Pete Carroll loves Devin Witherspoon. Now, the fact that they picked him at 5, you might understand that, but loves Devin Witherspoon.
Yes. The other thing I picked up, though, was they basically made it sound like they were very much in the Anthony Richardson thing if he hadn't been picked at number 4.
I did not pick that up yet. I got a little bit of Seattle's press conference.
They had essentially given both quarterbacks on the roster. Both, by the way. It's fascinating, this sort of love that they seem to have for Drew Lock for no earthly reason known to man. But they were like informing both of these guys, Gino, fair enough. Like, hey, you might lose your starting job. Drew Lock, it's like, okay, watch the TV like everyone else. You'll find out where you are in the roster. Anyway, they would basically inform both these guys that, hey, look, this guy might be available, and I wouldn't rule it out. Like, just be aware.
Would it have been Richardson?
Yes. Yeah.
I did not catch that.
No, it was very much like if Indianapolis wasn't picking him, this was a guy they would be potentially interested in grabbing. And then when it became clear Richardson was Indy's guy, now it's like, oh, we're great. We love Witherspoon. Like, that's going to be our pick.
John Schneider was he was asked if the first 4 picks went as expected. He said, if you asked me 3 weeks ago, yes. But then because there was so many rumors leading up, nobody knew what to believe. But he said basically like 3 weeks ago, if you said, he's like, we knew something was going on with Arizona and Houston. I think they had some idea about Paris Johnson being in the mix. But ultimately, Will Anderson going before them, yes. Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud going before them, yes, and then Anthony Richardson going to the Colts. They're saying, okay, this is what we had expected 3-4 weeks ago, and then there was all the rumors about Will Levis and other things that might happen. So
this draft did get particularly wild before the actual draft in terms of smoke screens and rumors and innuendo, and I think I wonder if that's getting if it's getting intensified in this world where gambling is legal. Because before it was just like, oh, here's rumors, and it's like, well, you would get like a 50-50 split of, well, let's buy into this, and that's just smoke, Now the line moves, so it's like, oh, the betting line's moved. There's got to be something to it. It must be real. Whereas really, it's just the betting line moving to reflect, the money coming in, which is the 50% buying into it, while the other 50% are like, that's smoke. I just wonder if now we're in
betting
this world.
Lines, and because anybody can have sources now. It's not just Adam Schefter and Chris Mortensen with sources. It's like, oh, my hairdresser knows Anthony Richardson and the Colts might take him. All right, move the line.
But I think this world of legalized gambling now might intensify the sort of pre-draft smokescreen period because you have something to look at now. It's not just this intangible like, oh, here's a rumor, here's some buzz, here's some smoke. It's like, oh, the betting line just moved, 500 points. And now we've got to start talking about what do they know? Why is Will Levis going number 2 overall?
So, Pete Carroll said something like, I'm happy for all those guys. Obviously, they did their due diligence. Maybe would have picked Richardson. He was happy for all those guys who went. But Pete Carroll was raving about Devin Witherspoon. And it's not surprising. I mean, we were raving about watching him play and everything. But he made it a comparison to Troy Polamalu, who he coached at USC, for how he played the game.
Yeah.
And Pete was like, I can't compare Devin Witherspoon to anyone. Like the way he plays and the tenacity and the aggressiveness, the physicality, relative to his position. He's like the only person that I think sees football through the same eyes. Like the way he was describing it was, I can't describe anyone else besides Troy Polamalu.
I never made
awesome.
Yeah, I never made that connection during the process, but when you hear it out loud, it actually makes a ton of sense, because the single best trait that Devin Witherspoon has is his anticipation and reading of the game. Like, he's just ahead of everybody on the field almost at all times. Like, he makes a bunch of plays where they almost feel like guesswork because he's so far ahead of it. He's just read it and he's set off 3 steps ahead of anybody else. That was Palazzolo's entire career, which, again, you always spent the entire time going, is he guessing? Because he's guessing right all the time. Like, how is this working? Palazzolo was able to read the game and make those plays for his entire career that nobody else was making because he read it. And remember, there was like a brief period last year where Hufanga was making a bunch of those plays for San Francisco. And it's like, has he got that ability to read the game like that? And it turns out with him, no, he was just guessing for a while, and he guessed right for a sequence and then stopped guessing right, and all of a sudden it fell off. But Witherspoon has that. Like, it's so you have to watch him and then almost any other cornerback back to back to see the difference in how he's reading it versus everybody else. He's so far ahead of the game. And then you get like his actual traits of, burst to the ball, physicality at the catch point. He hits like a train when he does arrive. He's able to match and all those kinds of things. But it all starts with being a step ahead of everybody else on the play.
So Witherspoon goes at 5. It was only a big surprise because Seattle had found so many corners through the years later in the draft. Of course, Richard Sherman, Brandon Browner, Byron Maxwell, last year Tariq Woolen. I mean, it was kind of like Seattle's thing, right? They never draft corners that high because they're going to find them and develop them, and they have a type, and sometimes their type goes undervalued because of the length and everything that they emphasize. And we know that the pass rush is a massive question in Seattle. And if Jalen Carter's there, Pete Carroll might be a great person for him to be a motivator and, get him going. So I think a lot of people expected Will Anderson if he fell, Jalen Carter if they, felt comfortable with that, or Tyree Wilson because, of course, they would want the traits in the pass rush and all that stuff. So that's why it was a big surprise that they said, no, we're taking the corner. And again, I don't think we talk a lot about the philosophical idea of coverage players and pass rushers and how they're at least equivalents, where the NFL might not always see that. I don't think this was philosophical. I think it was just they love the player. Mm-hmm. And they were willing to go a little bit outside probably their comfort zone of usually having the 6'2", super long guys because Witherspoon's so different. Now, they also mentioned he could play inside a little bit. I'm interested to see if they want to play more man coverage. You now have 2 completely different body types at corner with Devin Witherspoon and Tariq Woolen, where Woolen could take the big, powerful receiver and Witherspoon can take the better route runner, whatever it might be. You have more flexibility on defense if you want to tap into that. I love that potential option for Seattle.
Yeah, I would be interested if they kick him inside and he becomes like their nickel corner because of that the size makes more sense for them in those circumstances. But they're still without like an obvious outside guy if that's the case. Like maybe he becomes one of those players where he starts outside, and when they go to nickel, he's the guy that moves in. They find a guy that plays 300 snaps on the outside as the third corner, even though he's not, the nickel corner who doesn't play the slot, I guess, would be the third guy.
Because he's so tenacious, against the run and screen game and all that stuff, blowing up swing passes from cornerback Devin Witherspoon, hashtag fun to watch. And then Jackson Smith-Njiba at 20. I thought Smith-Njiba would go in the teens. Mm-hmm. They get him in the 20s. And it's another draft where I think Seattle took expected top available players on the board, which is different from what they had done for so many years. Yeah. And Smith-Njiba, I think, is a great fit with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. He could step right in and play in the slot and play to his strengths.
This was a pick, I think, that would have been much more popular or common in mock drafts if anybody thought he would last that long. Like a lot of people have been giving Seattle slot receivers at pick number 20. They just weren't Jackson Smith-Njiba because everyone was certain he would be gone at some point before that, like maybe as early as 12 to Houston if they were still picking at that spot or somewhere in between. It just, I don't think it occurred to many people that the first receiver off the board might not happen until number 20. And then Seattle's they come out of this draft able to take essentially the top corner and the top wide receiver off the board, which is an absolute jackpot scenario for them. And another situation where if Jackson Smith-Njiba is just what he's advertised as, which is elite slot receiver, a guy that can be incredibly productive inside. 90% of his snaps in college were inside. Huge production. If he's just that, it's absolutely worth pick number 20 for Seattle with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett on the outside and a quarterback capable of getting the ball to him. But again, he might be able to do more. I mean, he does have the footwork, the route running ability, the hands, he has the size. Like, he's got all the tools to be able to play outside against press coverage. He's not necessarily pigeonholed into the slot. Obviously, they have Metcalf and Lockett already, so it's not like he just takes one of those spots, but he can potentially do more in this offense than the kind of the bottom or the worst case scenario, which is still absolutely worth what they paid for him.
A couple years down the road, though, as Tyler Lockett gets a little bit older,
right,
he steps in probably as the 2. For now, he's the 3. I mean, this is why I love being as deep as possible at receiver, because, okay, go cover DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jackson Smith-Njiba, and Noah Fant, by the way, and his speed at tight end, and Will Dissly. Go cover those guys. Good luck. And then, by the way, if Tyler Lockett gets hurt, Smith-Njiba could easily be your 2 opposite DK Metcalf. So I love that for Seattle. As they get into round 2, they had 2 picks. Pick 37, Derek Hall from Auburn, and then Zach Charbonnet, the running back out of UCLA. Hall, fascinating one, because this is where it became the Seahawks pick.
Yeah.
And now for the second straight year, they spent 2 second-round picks on both an edge and a running back. Last year, it was Boye Mafe and Ken Walker. This year, Derek Hall and Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, I didn't really love Derek Hall as a player. He's very much a one-trick pony at the moment. That being said, the one trick has been quite effective, and I think that gives him a fairly high floor of what he could do at the NFL level. He wants to win with power and with his long arm move basically all the time. And he does for the majority of the time. Like, it actually works. It's got him a pass rush grade above 80 in each of the last 3 seasons in the SEC. Like, that's not easy to do. So even if he never develops anything else, he probably has a role as a limited situational, one-trick type of player in the NFL anyway. And if you can actually get the rest of it out of him, if you can develop a couple more moves and strings to his bow, then maybe he becomes a player justifying, the 37th overall pick. So it is a reach, but I don't think it's a bad pick necessarily, because I can kind of see what they're working at with it. And then Zach Charbonnet, that's one that doesn't make a ton of sense, but in this world where everybody plays a running back by committee, et cetera, all of a sudden your 1-2 punch is Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. I mean, that's very potent backfield potentially.
I will say this about Derek Hall. 61st percentile pass rush grade historically against all NFL prospects. He has produced as a pass rusher, even if it is, like you said, a little bit limited in how he's won. And then an incredible athletic profile. The question for Hall, the run defense has been poor. I think there's just a lot of room to grow overall as a football player. But we talked about Will Anderson not being this elite pass rusher, elite prospect overall, everything. Trust Will Anderson to produce at the next level. But Hall has similar SEC pass rush production. So I think he has a chance, even if he is one-sided just as a pass rusher at the next level, to go with 34 and a half inch arms, 90th percentile, ran 4.55, 10-yard split, 96th percentile at 1.55, broad jump and shuttle and all that stuff. Really good for Derek Hall. So that part I get. I as a developmental pass rush specialist, I get it. And Charbonnet, say what you want about taking running backs where you take him. I think he was the clear running back 3. You get him in round 2 with your 4th selection in the draft, where you already picked high-value positions at corner and receiver. I think it's fine, man. I think him and Ken Walker as a 1-2 punch become potentially one of the better 1-2 punches in the NFL now, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, and then I quietly like their day 3 as well. They understood that, look, our weaknesses are still the trenches, either side. So they basically just started adding guys, multiple players, on both sides of the line, right? They had a guard, they had a center, they had an interior defensive lineman, they had an edge rusher. And it's like, all right, maybe none of these guys works out, but we're literally going to take a shotgun approach to the 2 areas of weakness and just hope in day 3 something sticks. And if one of those guys sticks, it's worth it.
So last year they found 2 starting tackles in Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross, Tariq Woolen, who looks like a potential elite edge, Ken Walker at running back in the 2nd round. Is there someone else in there that was a heavy contributor in year 1? either way, it was one of the best draft classes in a while. This one looks like it could be up there as well. We're giving it an A. By the way, Oluwatimi, the center in round 5, he's competing with Evan Brown, who they bring in from the Lions. He's competing right away as a starting center. If they find another 5th-round starter, Charbonnet will play, Witherspoon and Jackson Smith-Njiba will play and contribute. Hall's a developmental guy with all the other second-round edges that they have there. There's a lot of potential here for Seattle. If this is back-to-back years of really good drafting, Seattle could be a force in a couple years if Geno Smith keeps it up. If Geno Smith regresses, it might not matter, but they might be looking for a quarterback a year from now. But I love what the Seattle Seahawks did in this draft.
Yeah, I think it was one of the best drafts out there.